is jointly hosted by two important institutions. The first one is the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area. And then the second one is the ASEAN Studies Center Universitas Gadjah Mada. Please give a round of applause to these two institutions. Before I start and before I invite the representative from these two institutions, let me introduce myself. My name is Poppy. I'm a lecturer at the International Relations Department, Universitas Gadjah Mada. I'll be hosting the session and hopefully until around probably almost noon. And we will have a very great speakers today. But then before that, I would like to invite first Mr. Samuel Nur Samsu from area to give an opening remark for a brief opening remark. I would like to invite Mr. Samuel Nur Samsu. Please, the time is yours.
So, thank you, Dr. Poppy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Samuel Nur Samsu. I am from AREA, or Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. So, it was my great pleasure to welcoming you in the session on behalf of AREA. AREA is honored to be the partner in the session, collaborating with FPCI and also ASEAN Studies Center from Gadjah Mada University to host this panel on ASEAN Centrality, and Indo-Pacific. As you may or may not know, AREA is a research institute and also international organization. We are dealing with ASEAN member states and also 6 other East Asian countries. And one of our major focus is ASEAN integration. And this ASEAN centrality issue is actually kind of like a big thing in our organization. We discuss this a lot. And the question on this panel, can ASEAN change the geostrategic chessboard, is for us, from our experience, is a challenging and also interesting questions. Because throughout our experience, we know that the question arise and the issues arise not only from the outside, like US-China trade war and also other dynamic geopolitical situation, but also from inside, which how can we align our purpose, our agenda from ASEAN member states to the same purpose in the ASEAN centrality. So therefore, we are grateful for FPCI that already invite distinguished speakers. His Excellency Ambassador Jose Tavares and also Dr. Ha Antoine, Dr. Hafi, and also Professor Richard, and also our wonderful moderator, Dr. Poppy, which comes from different backgrounds, and I'm sure that they will give different perspectives and nice perspectives. And also to all participants here with different backgrounds, don't hesitate to give comments, to provide inputs, join the discussion to make this a lively and dynamic discussion. And I'm sure that this discussion today will provide nice outcomes that will be useful for all of us. So lastly, I hope we have a wonderful and fruitful discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Samuel Nur Samsu. And I would like to invite Dr. Dafri Agus Salim, the director of the ASEAN Studies Center Universitas Gadjah Mada, for having opening remarks. Please, Pak Dafri, the time is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to apologize if I do this kind of opening speech by much more informal, simply because I think this is a very important event. So, Your Excellencies, Ambassador Jose Tavares, Your Excellency Robert Matthews Michaltens, Your Excellency Dr. Ditinan Pongsu Dirak, Your Excellency Professor Richard Haidarian, Your Excellency Dr. Poppy Solistaningsih Winartis, my colleague actually. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to be able to participate in this great event today. I did really wonder how big and how comprehensive the reach of this conference would be by the time I received an invitation from Ambassador Dino Patijalal. On behalf of ASEAN Studies Center UGM, I sincerely appreciate the agenda, and it is honestly such an honor for ASEAN Studies Center UGM to collaborate with the APCI in organizing one of the parallel sessions and conference on Indonesian foreign policy today. As I believe, it is a very important agenda to promote inclusive foreign policy through such events, where scholars, public figures, think tanks, and other stakeholders could gather here, share their thoughts, and also get involved directly in policy making. I really hope that IFV will be conducted continuously in the future, since I see the importance of such agenda toward the future about Indonesia and ASEAN's foreign policy. Ladies and gentlemen, as a regional organization, ASEAN has shown a variety of roles, ranging from handling and preventing open conflict to its roles in encouraging the design of joint free market in Southeast Asia region. This creates ASEAN as the only regional organization in the region, and that has a credibility and able to work for more than 40 years. Even today, the process of regionalism in Southeast Asian region within the framework of ASEAN accelerates intensively, characterized by an agreement on the target of the establishment of the ASEAN community, which was reached back then in 2003, and further agreement on the ASEAN Charter in 2007, and followed by a lot of cooperation that strengthened ASEAN centrality. At the same time, the development of the ASEAN cooperation was also accompanied by many evaluations in the regionalism process in ASEAN, especially on the fact that there were still many internal problems. There are also a lot of challenges facing by the ASEAN. In the fact, many circles describe this ASEAN as still very elitist project organization. It is undeniable that this understanding gap will greatly affect the process of regional integration holistically in the future, especially in the line with increasing complexity of the process after the achievement of the ASEAN community in 2015. Around 50 or 52 years later, since the establishment of ASEAN is at the important crossroads. Increasing geopolitical competition in putting new pressure on ASEAN centrality, for example. Neighboring powers such as China are finding new methods for exerting influence through soft power and access to official development assistance. The 32nd ASEAN Summit in Singapore illustrated how ASEAN leadership is being tested by rapidly changing events and geopolitical alignments. Ladies and gentlemen, the world geopolitical shift alongside with China's as the current emerging power have been great challenge for Indonesia as a state or as a part of the ASEAN. As we might already know, the world is entering a dangerous phase when the two emerging countries are against one another or repel one another. It will definitely affect ASEAN through many forms. Let's say trade war, many other significant impacts that will challenge the ASEAN. The United States-China competition is also only about tariff, not only about the tariff and trade and good. There is longer-term competition in the economic growth, technology, innovations, and for influence actors across the region and the world. China, as the world's second largest economy now, is getting more ambitious and some say assertive policy toward the world and regions. One of the ways is definitely through the so-called Belt and Road Initiative to develop infrastructure to connect all the way to Europe and ASEAN. The Indonesia-Pacific concept emerged to refer to the countries and region around Indonesia, Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean as a whole. The concept began to be used since almost a decade ago as an extension of the Asia-Pacific concept, which traditionally only included countries and regions around Pacific Ocean. Thus, Indo-Pacific can be called as a geopolitical concept that combines the Asia-Pacific region with the region around the Indian Ocean as a whole. As a relatively new concept, with a broad geopolitical coverage and diverse issues, there are differing views on the form of characteristic of the international interactions in the Indo-Pacific context. The US and some other countries prioritize the Indo-Pacific as a free and open regions. While Indonesia holds that the Indonesia-Pacific cannot be interpreted only in the free and open context, Indonesia, from the beginning, was of the view that the Indo-Pacific must also have either characteristics, namely inclusive, transparent, and comprehensive, bring benefit to the long-term interests of all countries in the region, and is based on the shared commitment to bring peace, stability, mutual prosperity. In addition, Indonesia also carries the idea of unified view among ASEAN countries regarding the Indo-Pacific cooperation, as well as fighting for the central role of ASEAN in such cooperation. The agreement of ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific can be considered as evidence of the success of Indonesia diplomacy in ASEAN, as well as the importance of Indonesia leadership in these regional organizations. Indonesia succeeded in convincing its neighbors in the region that ASEAN must play a leading role in determining the directions and the future of Indo-Pacific cooperation. Otherwise, the biggest profit will be enjoyed by the handful of countries outside ASEAN. In addition, without the centrality of ASEAN, the Indo-Pacific cooperation, which could negate the regional order and mechanism developed by ASEAN. Ladies and gentlemen, for ASEAN, the agreement on this document is not final purposes. The challenging going forward in how to implement the documents to technical level, including convincing large countries outside ASEAN that the centrality of ASEAN is the best choice that benefit all parties. A challenge that no less great is also faced by Indonesia. After successfully realizing ASEAN joint positions, Indonesia must continue its hard work in implementation phase. To achieve optimal results, synergy with the ASEAN countries is absolutely necessary. At the domestic level, the synergy between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other stakeholders also plays an important role. Changes in the global order make two of the world's biggest powers in Indo-Pacific region. If the past Indonesia paddled between two rocks alone, now in the time Indonesia invite all countries to another seems benefit cooperation can be shared and negative impact arise around participants. Thank you all for being here today and taking the time to patiently listen to what I had to say in this session. And once again, thank you for the wonderful people who organized the Conference of Indonesia Foreign Policy. I really wish we all could have insightful discussion for more peaceful purpose and proper Southeast Asia and Indo-Pacific region in the future. Thank you very much for your attention. Selamat siang.
Thank you for both the university partners and also the think tank partners for this session. So we're going to come to our session. But before that, as you can see the topic for today, I would like to ask the question to audience about ASEAN. How many of you believe that ASEAN is still relevant in this current situation? Please raise your hand if you believe that. Not as many as I expected. Please, again, raise your hands. Okay, I thought that all of you will raise your hand, but it's not. Well, yes. And then the second thing, as we can see from the previous opening speech as well, we're entering what Pak Dino mentioned as the hot peace. How many of you believe that ASEAN will have a very significant role in sort of like solving what we call as this hot peace? Please raise your hand. Oh, okay. Well, it's less than the previous one, but still a bit kind of optimistic. I hope so. And last one, anyone, if you listen to the Ibu Retno speech this morning, and there was a quote that despite the fact that the global economy is in a downturn, but the ASEAN is regarded as the bright spot in the world economy. How many of you believe in this statement? Please raise your hand. Woo! In terms of the economic sense, you are more optimistic than in terms of the political sense. Well, please give a round of applause first before I would like to invite to our speakers for today. We have 4 prominent speakers. I would like to invite Ambassador Jose Tavares, currently the Director General of ASEAN Cooperation Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please, Pak Dubes. And then the second one is the Madam Ambassador, the Permanent Representative of the Republic of Singapore to ASEAN. Please, Ms. Ling Pi. The third speaker will be Dr. Kavi Chongkitavorn. I hope that I spell your name correctly. Okay. It's a senior researcher from area. Please come forward. And last but not least, I would like to invite Professor Richard Heydarian. Currently, he's affiliated with National Chengchi University in Taiwan. Please give big round of applause to our speakers. And as you can see, we have a very great combination here. 2 ambassadors, yes? And then 2 academics, should I say that? Hopefully, we will see from 2 kind of perspective from the government side and also much more sort of like critical side to this question or to the topic. The first question to all of these speakers. As this morning we heard Pak Dino mention about the dangers of the hot peace. Do you think ASEAN should stay away or probably shy away from these dangerous sort of like rivalries? Or is there anything that ASEAN can do in order to cool down this sort of like situation? So I would like to invite first to the ambassador, both the ambassador and then later on to the professors. Yes, please, ambassador.
Thank you very much, Poppy, for this opportunity, for having me here. And thank you so much, all of the distinguished participants that are present here. So I can see today, like your question about the relevant and irrelevant of ASEAN. Sometimes I think that you are asking too much. Yeah, you're asking too much and you are giving too little to ASEAN. Really, in terms of authority, you don't give in too much because ASEAN remains to be an intergovernmental organization, which the sovereignty remains to be in the ASEAN member states. It is not like European Union, where there is a supranational body. There is a European Parliament, European Commission is like an European government, which it does not exist in ASEAN. And you have the European Court of Justice. If you don't follow the rules, you have the sanctions. That is not, ASEAN is not even near to that. So in terms of authority, sovereignty, ASEAN is still far behind. Instead of budget, ASEAN's budget is about 20 million US dollars annually. So each of our member states provide about 2 million each year. So in comparison with the European Union, it's about 135 billion euros, 8,000 times bigger. So you don't have kind of like the bodies to implement the decision taken by ASEAN. Who is implementing it? It's ASEAN member states. So then who is to blame actually? It's not ASEAN. I think you're asking too much of ASEAN and you're giving too little. Now, let me tell you one thing. That ASEAN is shy away from the challenges? Never. Look at the history. We came up with zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, right? At the time. And my time is up. My colleagues here is saying that. So you look at it, and the Southeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. Now we have 39 high contracting parties of the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, a treaty obligation that anytime you can mobilize this, including 5 permanent UN Security Council members are actually high contracting parties of the TAC. Can you imagine this? This is a powerful tool, diplomatic tool that can be mobilized for those countries to continuously, we can ask, please, this is your treaty obligation. It's a ratified treaty that you can continue to contribute and cooperate with ASEAN. Now, if you go through, if you see the master plan of ASEAN connectivity to, and then later on, of course, in relation to your hot piece is the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. That's the contribution of ASEAN to address this kind of hot piece that Dino mentioned, even though I didn't listen to him speaking in the opening ceremony. I guess more or less.
Right.
So this is my...
All right, thank you, Ambassador. And then, what do you think, Madam Ambassador Li Peng? Do you really think the same thing with Ambassador Tavares mentioned earlier, that ASEAN is too limited? That is the problem. Yes.
Absolutely. We are a small organization. We are made up of 10 new countries, still learning how to manage our own sovereignty and unwilling to pool it and create a supranational entity. I also would say that I think ASEAN was born out of regional leaders' decision to manage the tensions in our region in a productive way. ASEAN is a unique concept. It is a platform that is open and inclusive. It brings people together and it focuses on issues of peace and development. It distracts all of our partners away from strife or tension. And that remains our ethos today. So we are being asked to do things that ASEAN wasn't really designed to do. But ASEAN itself as a concept is our response to actors or partners who want to foment turmoil or worse in our region. We are saying, no, this is our region. If you want to come here, you got to come here on our terms. And that is what ASEAN is all about. So even today, where again, there are great geopolitical forces in move at play, ASEAN has stayed true to our goal, our vision. We are here to develop, we are here to build, we are here to work with you. But we are not exclusive, we will never become so. And I think that the most recent reinforcement of this view was the adoption of the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, which Bapak Dafri expounded on earlier. These are immemorial concepts. They will withstand the test of time. And although right now it looks as though things are quite turbulent again, I'm quite confident that ASEAN, by staying true to ourselves, we're going to weather this storm.
Okay, thank you, Madam Ambassador. Please give a round of applause first. And then, what do you think, Dr. Kavi Chongtevaron? Do you agree with those previous comments about the ASEAN?
Well, I really support the two comments, but I would like to go a little bit further because I think ASEAN's need to be a good bridge builder, because to cross from hot peace to a much more warmer situation, you need a good carpenters. And ASEAN has all the mechanism to provide conflicting parties, rivalries to come, and make deals. For example, ASEAN know exactly which pillar need to be strengthened. So I think I'm pretty confident. So we have to engage. Actually, in time of uncertainty, in time of discontentment, ASEAN has a role. Why? Because ASEAN is benign. ASEAN has no enemy. Everybody say ASEAN is weak, but our weakness is our strength. Everybody comes every year. You see, they come to ASEAN because ASEAN offers a platform. Rivalries become friends. The Japanese and the Korean were on talking terms in Bangkok. The Americans talk to the Chinese. This is the kind of platform that ASEAN offers. But ASEAN needs to make sure that it always keeps its house in order. We have 10 members. We are like, what do you call, Disneyland of world politics. We have all kinds of political system. And yet, we work together, 52 years, we build prosperity. And now we have to go further. And I'm glad that Tavares is talking about Indo-Pacific. Actually, Indo-Pacific is the best initiative from ASEAN. After years and years, 1976, we have Treaty of Amity, we have SOFAN, we have CHONFES, but nothing is better than AOIP. You know why? Because this will serve as a template for other dialogue partners to engage with ASEAN. And much more important, we set the rule. We are the control towers. You better look at our signal. You land there at the right airport, otherwise you will miss. You look at Trump. Trump didn't come to Bangkok. We didn't get angry. We respond with Troika. And America was so surprised. And now they said that we want everybody in America. Wait and see. ASEAN will have surprise in response to President Trump. So ASEAN is in a very good position, but we have to make sure that we will not choose side. We are pro-ASEAN. Why should we have to choose side? So ASEAN must be a good bridge builders for all the conflicting parties to come and make sure that when they leave the stage, they will be in good terms. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please give a round of applause. And then, Professor Haider, and what do you think about it? Is it possible ASEAN to be the bridge for those two things? And then with this, yes, please.
I think the airplane food made my coat a bit tight, so I'm just going to stand up here. I'm not sure what else I can add. I think everything has been said. But as I always say, you may not be interested in the Indo-Pacific, but Indo-Pacific is interested in you. So a shameless plug-in, my latest book is called Indo-Pacific, Trump, China, and the Struggle for Global Mastery. So sorry, I'm a little bit on jet lag. I had a preview of that talk in Hudson in DC. So I have my notes with me. What I can say is, personally, Indo-Pacific is something close to my heart. I mean, my ancestors came from Iberia, from the Caspian region, and East Asia. So I'm kind of covered the Indo-Pacific. Now, what is the place of ASEAN here? I think 3 very quick points I want to make here. The first thing is, yes, everyone says don't choose a side, but on certain issues you have to actually choose a side. On certain issues we have already chosen a side, and sometimes by not choosing a side you're already making a choice. I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. So the important thing for ASEAN here is dynamic balancing. I think on issues concerning trade protectionism, the ASEAN has already made very strong statement against the troubling phenomenon we're seeing, especially from the Trump administration. I think we're not very happy about the trade war that is happening with China and the unintended and intended consequences that could have. But on the issues concerning maritime revanchism, territorial aggression, we also have to make it very clear to China that we're not happy about what they're doing right now in the South China Sea, which is changing the facts on the ground. And I think the ASEAN is not living up to the expectation they raised in the past. Which brings me to the second point. I think the ASEAN also has to more embrace alternative and parallel efforts to strengthen its multilateralism. One of the problems of ASEAN is what I call middle institutional trap. It's like middle income trap. We did a fantastic job of going from conflicting countries during the confrontancy era to have what constructivists call a security regime, whereby the threat of use of war now is unthinkable. But in terms of our ability to come together and constrain external powers from dividing and conquering us, or to trample upon our basic rights, sovereign rights in international waters, we're not doing a very good job. And our muwafaqat is not actually how it's understood in Arabic, or it's not consensus as it's understood in the European Council. It's actually unanimity decision-making process. And in situations whereby some ASEAN countries are very dependent on external powers, you're effectively giving them veto to prevent the ASEAN to come together. I think the South China Sea issue is a very clear case of that, whereby the ASEAN is not stepping up to the expectations. And that's where mini-lateralism comes in the picture. For instance, one of my suggestions is, if the ASEAN-China's Code of Conduct negotiation is not going anywhere, why not Philippines, Vietnam, and let's say Malaysia, who are ASEAN claimant states, they negotiate parallel kind of real Code of Conduct, which is based on UNCLOS and international law. The last thing I want to emphasize here is, there's this very interesting concept by Deleuze and Guattari. They call it rhizomatic understanding of power. I think one of our biggest mistakes is that we tend to understand power in this part of the world as hierarchical, arboreal, like a trunk of a tree, whereby everything is about US and China and how we're pawns. When in reality, power actually operates in a rhizomatic way, right? In non-linear ways, and there are many situations whereby individual ASEAN countries can be very influential, and we can work with Japan, Korea, other middle powers to push our interests without being trapped by the US-China competition. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Haydarian. I think all of you mentioned that the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific can be used as the starting point for ASEAN to do something more in this current geostrategic situation. But the question is how far it is, and then how can it be being used in terms of the reality, in the actuality, in the policy, sort of like actual policy making. And then one of the things that I would like you also to mention is how inclusive this outlook will be regarding what we mean as the Indo-Pacific is. And then I would like to ask Ambassador Tavares first, please. Yes.
Well, for the Indo-Pacific, of course, as already been described, and we all follow closely the geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainties, major power rivalries, it's a multi-dimensional contestation for supremacy, military supremacy, technological supremacy, economic supremacy, and of course there is contestation for sphere of influence and the danger of proxy. So what happens is that we realize that this kind of situation and environment is potentially can drag here and there ASEAN from one side to another and potentially derail the process in the Southeast Asian countries that we have to choose here and there. And these, what happens is that this can threaten the peace and stability that has been going on for the last 50 years, more than 50 years, that ASEAN be able to maintain, and as a result, prosperity. We are the third largest, in Asia as a market, and the sixth largest economy in the world. Last year, I mentioned a little bit of data that the foreign direct investment is the largest ever that ASEAN have ever received of inflows of foreign direct investment, which is 154 billion US dollars last year, despite the fact that we have a lot of economic uncertainties. Now, what happens is that now ASEAN came up with the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. We expressing it. This is our own narrative and our own perspective. In one sense, I can say that this is a projection of ASEAN centrality, telling all of our partners, telling the whole world that we are not going to choose this one or that one, but we have our own. Our intention is clear. Now, your question is that how effective it will be. let me tell you that even if, this is a hypothetical expression, even if an organization, a country, whatever, and even an international organization came up with a really brilliant idea or concept or strategy, I don't think that a country that have already the strategy will relinquish it and embrace that brilliant idea. That will never happen. Now, expecting this to happen from ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific is unrealistic, I must say. So what happens that? What ASEAN is suggesting is that this is an alternative of cooperation. We are not going for rivalry. We are going for cooperation for mutual benefit. We have our principles. You already are well aware of that. Openness, transparency, based on international law, based on the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. Now, how to follow it up? Of course, we have to identify the commonalities of all the strategies on the Indo-Pacific that are around. We know that Japan has its own free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, US as well, Australia, India with the SAGAR, and then the quadrilateral security dialogue. They have their own. But what are the commonalities? Actually, they are all talking about connectivity. That we take it out. The commonalities of that. Is there anybody not for sustainable development goals? Everybody is for sustainable development goals. Maritime cooperation, we are there. There are various issues of common concern and challenges that can be working together. Why is that we are focusing on confrontation and rivalry? Why there is a plenty of room for cooperation? That is where ASEAN is working about. Now you're telling me that is there any result now? That's a process. There is nothing happens instantly. So what happens that? Look at what ASEAN, we have transformed ASEAN countries in previously what confrontation, war, and so on, invasion from one country to another in ASEAN. That still exists, but we have transformed the dynamic. And it happens overnight? No, decades, 5 decades. Now what happens that? If you want to judge whether this kind of perspective effective or not, it will be gradual. It takes time. We will engage, like next year we will follow up the outlook on the Indo-Pacific and see through the years, we'll see and we'll measure the effectiveness, how it's work in the ASEAN Pacific, Indo-Pacific outlook.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And please, Madam Ambassador Li Peng, do you think, do you have similar idea or you have a different sort of like way of seeing these things?
I think we have to debate the AOIP and how to bring it forward. And this conference is a very good avenue and channel for exchanging views. My own view is that using the chessboard analogy, the AOIP keeps ASEAN central. It rests upon the proposition of ASEAN centrality. But the 10 ASEAN member states always have to be aware that centrality has to be worked at. It's not something that is a God-given right. It doesn't happen automatically. But at least with this AOIP, we have kept ourselves relevant and we can choose which chess piece we want to be. We can choose or we can talk about the design of the chessboard and we can talk about the rules of the game. So we are still relevant in that sense. But our relevance remains tied to our centrality, which is not a given. So we got to work pretty hard at staying united, staying relevant in order for us to make the AOIP a meaningful document. Next year, I think we're going to have a lot of workshops, forums, seminars to talk about how ASEAN can develop the AOIP. And I think that lest we forget, the AOIP, being ASEAN, is a holistic document. So we have a section that works on the political side, on the economic side, trade facilitation, and also in connectivity. We're spanning cooperation across all of our areas of work. So the outlook is a holistic one, and I'm optimistic about it.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador, for your optimistic view. What do you think about it? How does this will impact the ASEAN centrality if there are some things that we have to choose between these two?
No, we don't have to choose. The ASEAN just stay where it is and make sure that it's aware of the environment. I would like to mention 2 points before we move forward. You have to give credit to the current situation, the chair and Indonesia, because the outlook came about, not because of miracle. It came from hard work. It came from consensus. It came from the senior official. It came from the scholar from Indonesia and Thailand that worked together. It could not happen last year, and it will never happen next year. It's only happened this year because of the synergies between Indonesia and Thailand that work together. It shows you that it needs that kind of collaborative effort for such a grand scheme. And I would argue that ASEAN, through AOIP, has earned, I repeat, ASEAN centralities. Because ASEAN centrality, let me be frank, has gone through 3 phases. Number 1, people look down ASEAN centrality, said you don't earn it, you just offer the venue. Yet we have done that. And second phase is that ASEAN offered the agenda. You know, people come, major power comes, they discuss issue, regional, international issue. From time to time, major power come out with their own issue. But this time, the third phase of ASEAN centrality is that we are the initiator. We have the outlook. So we set the guideline. Now we have to make sure that we are not talk shop. We have to make sure that within coming months, there will be certain projects contained in all these 4 areas. You know, Tavares mentioned connectivities. You have also economic matters, you have sustainability, and many others. Is like, you know, 7-Eleven, you know. ASEAN Outlook is 7-Eleven version. You can pick anything, and you synergize interface with all the framework, and that is what ASEAN is all about. And actually, people were so surprised, because when it started, nobody thought that ASEAN would pull off the Indo-Pacific, because earlier they thought that, well, you know, certain member disagree with certain member, it will flop. But actually, the outlook was the idea that came about because of Indonesia took leadership and then consult from the bottom up with other ASEAN member. And then you have the right moment, the chair who supported, the Thai, humble enough to work with Indonesia, and Tavares can give you a 3-hour briefing. How come this AOIP become a reality? You know, it takes less than 12 months. Some said it's 18 months. Actually, it takes very small amount of time, because it's the meeting of minds. And when ASEAN come together and join force, I mean, good idea happened. That's, I think, we should give credits to, you know, ASEAN member. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chongkitaphorn. Professor Hediran, earlier you mentioned that ASEAN is now trapped into what you call as the middle organization, institutional trap. And what do you think how ASEAN can overcome that kind of situation, especially considering the current, you know, the geostrategic chessboard? If you mention that ASEAN is trapped into that kind of situation.
I like this British Parliament style. We sit and we stand up and make a point. It's good. Well, going back to that, I'll try to be very quick about it. There's a concept I'm building on. I call it strategic intersectionality. I get it from feminism. The notion of intersectionality is that you're never just one thing, right? You're a mother, you're a wife, you're African American, you're lower class, upper class. I think when it comes to ASEAN centrality, you can apply the same kind of idea. Centrality in which section, in which dimension. I think definitely there are areas where ASEAN is already central. The convening power of ASEAN makes us automatically logistically central. I remember for the fact that sometimes, for instance, during the ASEAN Regional Forum, that's the only time that you can see a North Korean foreign minister and an American State Department top official are there in the same place. It's very hard to get that since the collapse of 6-party talks. But ASEAN is not as central in other areas, and perhaps there are areas where it's well beyond ASEAN's capacity. I think we have to have this soul searching and talk about what is really within the ASEAN jurisdiction. And this is where I talk about minilateralism as a way to deal with certain areas whereby multilateralism doesn't work, because I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I get a lot of criticism for it. They say, oh, Richard, if you focus on minilateralism, you're weakening ASEAN. But if there are things that ASEAN cannot really work around, or it's beyond its mandate, given the limitation of its mandate, then you can actually see minilateralism as a plus. If Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, key countries can work on certain issues of shared interest and have the necessary interest and necessary resources, then let it be, right? And let's be honest, ASEAN is not Southeast Asia. The organization is not the entire Southeast Asia, right? So there's a distinction there. But the other thing we have to keep in mind is this: if you read the document, ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. I mean, first of all, I completely agree with Kavi. We have to give credit not only to Indonesia, but also Singapore. I think if you look at the ASEAN chairmanship of Singapore, you already saw the ingredients of what was the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and a lot of credit to them. So I and Kavi were like the opposition, and then the government. But at the same time, I think we have to be realistic about the circumstances that this came about, and the text. The text is very, very defensive and aspirational and assertive, right? And it's defensive because, for good reason. When I hear about Indo-Pacific, when I started hearing about it, and I think a lot of people have this point of view in ASEAN, is many got suspicious. What is this Indo-Pacific? Who are pushing for it? Because this is not just a geostrategic, factual paradigm. It's also a geopolitical agenda. And the Trump administration is suddenly talking about Indo-Pacific, not Asia-Pacific. It's suddenly talking about maritime zones of Indo-Pacific, not the land areas where the BRI is very dominant. So ASEAN is clearly worried about this. And therefore, you cannot separate the discussion of ASEAN and the discussion of Quad, the four major powers who are supposed to be pushing back against China. I think the way forward is for the ASEAN not to only assert centrality, but to achieve that centrality, at least in certain areas, by working with Quad, but not against China, but in terms of strengthening their own capacity. I think Japan, for instance, is doing a great job in making sure that when it comes to infrastructure development, China is not the only game in town. Japan and also other middle powers are helping us very much in terms of developing our Coast Guard capability, so that we don't need to talk about war and naval showdown, but talk about law enforcement and protection of our basic rights. I think India and other countries are helping ASEAN's own technical capabilities. This is the way forward. I think there's a way that ASEAN centrality and the Indo-Pacific that the Trump administration is talking about will not be mutually exclusive. And we have to negotiate that with strength of conviction.
All right, thank you, Professor Haidar. I think we only have a limited time, so unfortunately to the audience that I'm not allowed to have any open session for the Q&A session. Really apologize for that. But then I would like to ask the speaker to have like a very short, brief sort of like conclusion. What do you think about the future of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific regarding this kind of challenges regarding the current situation between the rivalry and all these geostrategic situations. One brief sort of like comment as a, one sentence from each to give like the future of the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, especially responding to the current situation.
I think what we are doing with Indo-Pacific in the future is that we are trying to transforming, maybe it's too kind of a strong word, transforming, but turning the challenges into opportunities of cooperation in the future. There are huge projects like, for example, let me take just one example, Sustainable Development Goals, poverty eradication. Can you believe? It's a massive undertaking if you just put together countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Let's talk about the progress of development, how much you achieve in this eradication of poverty in the region. Some are already far behind, some are still lag behind us, some already move forward. Now, in this kind of forum, we have all of the players there. They can help one another, actually. They can help all of the small countries in the Pacific Islands, Indian Ocean countries. Indonesia is ready also to provide capacity building. We are a G20 countries. No longer we be asking all of the time. It's time also for us to share and give.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Ambassador.
Walter, you must trust ASEAN. In absence of ASEAN, even with or without Indo-Pacific, we will be in trouble. So ASEAN is an imperfect perfection as an organization.
All right, thank you. Please. I like that term, yes.
I cannot top that anymore. But the idea is very simple. Either we hang, together or we're hung apart. I think that very much applies to us in the ASEAN. But I have to be very clear about it. It really annoys me when people talk about small powers in ASEAN. For heaven's sake, Indonesia has as much population as the United States, and it's going to be one of the top economies in the world. Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand are already going to be middle powers in a decade or so. So one of the things we have to keep in mind is agency. We do have an agency. The future of ASEAN depends on what we say today, what we talk about today, and what we do. There's nothing predetermined about the future. So
Okay,
that's
thank
my
you.
theological argument.
Thank you, yes, thank you. Please, Madam Ambassador.
I think we spent quite a bit of time at AOIP, but I want to flag that this year we made another remarkable achievement as ASEAN. Namely, we concluded negotiations on the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. We were a bit sad that we made it to the end with 15 countries, but we're still hopeful that the 16th will join us. But that said, this is the largest free trade area ever created. And this is an ASEAN-led initiative. So I think ASEAN does not lack for ambition or vision or endurance. So I think these are qualities that are going to help us weather whatever challenges are coming ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador. Please give a round of applause to all the speakers. And I think, again, my apologies that I would like to say to you because there is no time for the Q&A session. But again, please stand up and then speakers, thank you so much for the very insightful discussion. I like your term, Professor, about the imperfection of imperfect. Wow, that's very cool. And thank you again for all the speakers. Yes, it's such a wonderful session and thank you. Yeah.